the old one and the president-elect, which I think is something worth talking about if we had more time. But we also conduct research on ageism and age discrimination and are advocates for change and inclusion. So I think the reason most people attend this is they have been a victim of age discrimination or have seen it happen to others in the workplace. And it truly is sad. Let me go ahead and define it. First of all, there's a legal definition, and the history of age discrimination in the workplace, well, at least in a legal context, dates back to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in 1967. So as far back as the mid 60s, people were experiencing age discrimination. So it's not new to our generation, but guess what? It's far more pernicious today than it ever has been. So let's define it. And I work with discrimination lawyers as well, so I'm well versed in, and I also teach human resources. So I understand the definition, and basically it's adverse action resulting from hiring and termination decisions. Now we have two kinds of ageism. We have stupid ageism and just basic ignorant ageism. No, I'm being facetious. We have age discrimination, and that is where, as I said, there's an adverse action related to hiring and termination. People aren't only not hired because of age, they're fired because of age. And guess what the number one age group for being downsized in the COVID-19 pandemic has been? I'm sure you're going to say, I'm not sure, but could it be people over the age of 40? You'd be right. That's the number one demographic for being restructured, downsized, laid off during the COVID pandemic. And there are reasons for that, which we will discuss later. So in addition to age discrimination, there's something we call, and it's a legal definition, age harassment. So you could be a victim of age discrimination, which relates to being hired or being terminated because of age, or you could be harassed because of your age. And that is becoming a more prevalent legal, I think, issue and the product of increasing lawsuits in the workplace. And age harassment has two primary conditions that need to be proved. And one is that it's pervasive and that there's a pattern that occurs in the workplace and that it is severe. So you can be a victim of ageism or age discrimination, whether you're fired or terminated or hired or not hired because of age, or someone is harassing you in the workplace. And harassment could also include failure to be promoted, failure to earn raises and bonuses. So it isn't just verbal harassment, like somebody calling you an old geezer or something of that nature, which would be construed as age harassment. So it's a lot like sexual harassment, but I must tell you, it's a lot harder to prove. So that's the good news, that you are protected in most states and by the federal government by virtue of statute, and specifically the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1967, which asserts that, or states that, it doesn't just assert it, it states that people over 40, if they are discriminated against in hiring and termination decisions, that constitutes legal jeopardy for the organization that is proven to have discriminated against them. It is also somewhat reassuring that 25%, almost 25% of EEOC cases in 2018 were age discrimination related. So 1 out of 4 workplace discrimination cases are based on age. I said that's the good news. I'm not sure that's good news, but it does mean that more and more people are stepping up and saying, no, I'm not going to tolerate, I'm not going to accept being discriminated on the basis of my age. All right, any questions about that? So I'm going to move into the second part of my or actually the second topic, which, there we go, thank you. Some assumptions about age. And I'm sure you've heard these before. Uh, and I'm going to kind of skip ahead to some meaningful data, but as part of this particular topic, but they are what I call zombie assumptions. They are dead. They have no merit, they have no relevance, and research has proven them to be false. But nevertheless, they're assumptions that seem to be prevalent when companies are discriminating against mature workers. One of the assumptions that I hear repeatedly is, well, older workers, and they usually use that term, older workers, they're going to be retiring soon. So we can't trust that they are going to be in their jobs for very long. They're all about ready to retire. Well, that assumption is a zombie assumption. That's simply not true. But even if people are nearing retirement, the average length of time that a person between the ages of 55 and 64 spends in a single job is 10 and a half years, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. 10 and a half years. You get a job and you're between the ages of 55 and 64, you're very likely to be there the rest of your working career. Guess what? A millennial is going to be there less than 3 years. So that is a zombie assumption. You hire a 32-year-old, on average, they'll be there 2.8 years. You hire a 48-year-old or 55-year-old, they're going to be there 10 years. So compare the economics of those two. That assumption is completely false. Another assumption is that older workers don't adapt well. Well, most of the time, our life experiences have compelled us to adapt far more than people in their 20s or 30s have done so. So that assumption is completely erroneous. Another assumption is that older workers are not up to speed with technology. Well, that is an erroneous assumption. You're here, right? You're using Zoom. I assume you have a smartphone. Most baby boomers have a smartphone. You probably read most of your news on either your smartphone or your desktop or your tablet computer, as do most millennials who actually don't actually read the news. So I think we're ahead of them on that point. I think they're watching Saturday Night Live mostly for their news, which, okay, they get some good information from Saturday Night Live. But my point is that that is a zombie assumption. However, it is important to realize that you got to stay aware of technology changes and how technology is changing. So, and it, it changes every 2 or 3 years, but so far I don't see a real change in social media landscape. Instagram and Twitter are still two of the primary communication media we use, and most of us are familiar with Facebook and have a Facebook account or have a LinkedIn account, and most of us are up to date on technology. So that is a zombie assumption. Another zombie assumption is that you're not going to be a team player, that somehow you're going to be independent and unmanageable, and that your knowledge or your experience is somehow going to be a detriment, and it's going to undermine your ability to be managed and be a team player. Another assumption is that, well, older workers, they don't want to learn anything new. They just want to come in and sit down and basically talk, and they're not as productive. Well, the research totally refutes that. Older workers are as or more productive than millennial or Gen Xer workers. They're more likely to be a more effective member of a team than a millennial or Gen Xer based on the research. So that's another zombie assumption. So those are the predominant assumptions that seem to govern the workplace. Also, there's an assumption that, well, older workers simply cost more. They cost more in terms of their absences. They cost more in terms of their need for health care. They cost more because they actually make more money. Well, that assumption has some merit, But if you look at the sunk cost, now compare the economics of hiring a mature worker who's going to be there 10 years versus hiring 3 millennials in that same period of time and having to repeat the investment in training in all 3 of those millennials. Plus, they're going to leave and take that training with them, often to a competitor. Well, the opportunity cost of actually hiring a mature worker is much lower. Another zombie assumption. So these are the assumptions that really govern why so many mature workers are not being hired and why they're often the first demographic group to be laid off, terminated, etc. So I'm sure you can think of a few others. Do any of you have any other thoughts about that? I think that pretty much covers it. So those assumptions are dead on arrival. Well, they were dead before they even, started the journey to arriving. But we're not doing a very good job of combating them. Can you think of organizations that have dedicated themselves to challenging the assumptions of ageism and age discrimination in the workplace? There just aren't many. So that's sad.
AARP.
Yeah, okay. I have a lot of thoughts about AARP, and they're not very good. AARP tends to assume everybody is retiring at age 50 to 55. They do recognize there's some discrimination, but to call them an advocate, I think would be exaggerating it far beyond its relevance. So they exist, primarily to serve retirees, and that's unfortunate. Another assumption that that I think relates to our conversation is not necessarily being hired or terminated, but it's small business ownership and entrepreneurship. The number one demographic group for entrepreneurship is, guess what? 40 to 60. 40 to 60. More people in their 40s to 60s start new businesses than do millennials and Gen Xers. And they start new businesses for a variety of reasons. One is because they've been downsized or terminated or wrongfully dismissed. But another reason is that they might have worked in a job for 20 or 25 years and they're ready for a new challenge. So that's a major factor. I mean, there are a myriad of reasons why people do it, but one of the reasons is meaningfulness. They just want to be meaningful, have a meaningful life, contributes to their quality of life. Guess what? I did a survey of targeted resources to that age group in the state of Washington, which is one of the most robust states for entrepreneurship in the country. There are let me repeat that, zero targeted resources to folks between the ages of 40 and 60 in the state of Washington for starting a new business. Now, I don't comprehend that, frankly. So our government has not picked up this mantle. Organizations certainly are not doing it. There are a few nonprofits, but basically we're kind of left out there hanging on a limb, fending for ourselves. So those are the assumptions that drive ageism and age discrimination. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention our cultural propensity as a country, as a society, to discard and dispose of older folks. We simply are a culture that doesn't have a high regard for age. But guess what? Unless you're prematurely killed or die, you're probably going to be 60 someday. And you're going to confront the same stuff that most of us here are confronting. And that really is a tragedy. I posted a comment on LinkedIn yesterday, and I basically said the message from organizations and our culture to workers over the age of 40 is don't get old. That's their message. Don't get old, because you're very unlikely to be hired. There won't be a job for you. So we have to really, I think, become advocates fighting what is often a hidden form of discrimination. We don't see a mature lives matter movement. We don't see a senior lives matter movement. and maybe we should. And there are reasons for that we'll discuss in the next webinar, not today. But let me move on to prevalence. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, millennial ages 25 to 34, as I mentioned earlier, the median tenure in each job is 2.8 years. It is longer with age. The BLS reports that for workers ages 35 to 44, the median duration is 4.9, from 45 to 54, 7.6, and between 55 and 64, it's 10.5 years. 10.5 years. You're going to be in a job 10 years. If you get a job at age 60, the statistics say from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you're going to be there for 10 years. Well, if you hire a millennial, age 30, they're going to be there 2.8 years. Okay, who is going to cost more to the organization? I think you can do the math. So I think that's really encouraging, but guess how many human resource managers, human resource professionals, recruiters, and hiring managers are aware of this? Not very many. In the human resources classes I teach, guess what? They are aware of this statistic. I make them aware of it. So the median age of all workers in the current economy is, guess, 42.3 years of age, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. What is that? What are the implications of that? That means there's a high probability that a lot of those people, well, first of all, they fall under the EEOC rubric of age discrimination, which is age 40 and above, but there's a high probability they're going to be discriminated against at some time in their workplace life, especially between the ages of 45 and 65. Currently, only 10% of people aged 65 to 69 are employed. People who retire at age 65 today can expect Social Security to provide the equivalent of only 39% of their incomes after deductions for basic Medicare expenses. So let's talk about the prevalence of it. What industry do you think leads the country in ageism and age discrimination? And a lot of it happens right here in Puget Sound. If you said high tech, you would be right. The tech industry struggles with ageism. 75% of IT workers report experiencing or noticing age discrimination in the workplace. As much as I like Google, guess what their median age is? If you said 30, you would be wrong. It's 29. 29. How many employees over the age of 45 are employed at Google? Guess what? They won't tell you. Why won't they tell you? Because there's only one. There's only one worker over the age of 45 at Google. I'm kidding. I don't know what that number is, but you have 29-year-olds making hiring decisions about 45 and 50-year-olds. Okay. They don't want to hire their parent or grandparent. I understand that, but that I think fuels those assumptions we talked about, the zombie assumptions. So the tech industry leads by far age discrimination in today's workplace environment. 75% of women aged 45 to 75 believe they have experienced workplace age discrimination. So we can say women, especially women of color, they have the highest level of age discrimination that we've been able to identify. So if you're a woman, you got it, 3 out of 4 are going to be discriminated against. If you are a person of color, a black man or black woman, guess what? You're going to be, according to the data, about 80% level of discrimination, and it's a little higher for black men. So you can imagine the frustration and the anxiety and the fear that people have, especially today when they've been downsized because of COVID. Here's something I found absolutely stunning. I did research on companies, and let me preface it by saying diversity and inclusion initiatives have really proliferated in the American workplace over the last couple of years, especially this year since the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, a lot of that I think is window dressing. Are these companies really committed to inclusion and diversity, or is this a response to the environment? Well, I'll let you decide that. My feeling is that no, that's not, because all of a sudden they really value diversity and inclusion. It's because they want to demonstrate that they're doing something about it. But guess what they don't include in their diversity and inclusion strategies? Age. They do not include age as a important variable for discrimination in their hiring and firing practices. Now, how is that even possible? Uh, being over 40 is a protected class, yet only 8% of companies surveyed uh, had age as a consideration in their strategic initiatives in diversity and inclusion. I find that, completely unacceptable. I was going to say tragic, but no, I think it's more than tragic. I think it, it's maddening. I mean, it really is beyond irritating. It's just a travesty. Um, so the basic conclusion about this is that age discrimination is prevalent. It's just prevalent everywhere, but there are some industries where it is more poignant and it's more salient than others. What are they doing about it? That's a good question, and we'll talk about that. Hopefully, if we have some more time. I should have brought a clock with me. I'll have to look at my clock. Where are we? Oh, we're in good shape. Okay, so impact. What is the impact? Well, clearly there's an economic impact. One of the reasons that there's an impact is only 33% of boomers are prepared for retirement. And I think that's probably going to increase as a result of COVID. So what are these people going to do? If you can only rely on Social Security for 40% of your living expenses, that means you got to supplement it somehow. How are you going to do that? You going to work for DoorDash? I don't know. Probably get a delivery job with Amazon, because that's about the only job you can get around here these days. I'm being facetious, but I don't know what professionals are going to do if this kind of discrimination continues. So the economic impact is great on a micro level. It's also significant on a macro level, because boomers have 80 million, there's 80 million boomers. They've been a vital part of the economy. If you reduce their disposable income, their ability to spend, that's going to have ripple effects through the economy. So companies have a vested interest in maintaining boomer employment, if for no other reason, their self-interest and future sales, because there's some people are not going to buy when they can't. So that has a tremendous economic impact. Okay, let's talk about the impact to the public infrastructure. Okay, is that going to cost government more to provide services to people who can't, live and don't have enough resources to support themselves? Yes, it will. So we could see more mature workers becoming homeless, or more mature workers, God forbid, having to move in with their millennial children. I wonder how that's going to work. So there's a huge economic impact, and I think there's a cultural impact. I think at some point, people feel guilty because of how their elders are being treated. And I don't necessarily mean people in their 80s. I'm talking about people in their 50s and 60s. This is the primary age group at which there is so pervasive and pernicious discrimination. So the data is very persuasive in demonstrating the nature of this problem and how prevalent and pervasive it is. And basically, we have done very little about it. Jacqueline B. James, who's co-director of the Center on Aging and Work at Boston College, she's done a lot of great work when it comes to ageism and age discrimination. She says that age-related comments are trivialized as merely stray remarks or office banter. According to Corbett Anderson, he's a counsel for the EEOC, culture is more forgiving of ageism than it is for some other more vile forms of discrimination. Age-based comments are more infused in the culture. So when those types of comments show up in a case, courts tend to view those comments differently. And perhaps that's subconscious than if the comments were made, for instance, about someone's race. So we immediately, I think, find comments or discrimination related to race unacceptable, but we seem to be much more forgiving and tolerant of age discrimination. And that's sad. So the data is meaningful, the data is persuasive, the data is irrefutable, and it suggests that there's a high level of age discrimination in our workplace. Let's move on. Any questions about anything I've talked about so far? You probably weren't aware of just how pervasive this is and how many people this affects and how little we're actually doing about it. And that's really unfortunate. It seems that American culture has negative image and negative images attached to being older. In the workplace, not only men and women in their 60s and 70s will confront animus, but even those now in their 40s and 50s. And that's hard to understand, frankly. Also, we have a shortage of workers in this country, especially in professional jobs. That's one of the reasons we are importing so many from foreign countries. Maybe companies should look at home. And if they stop discriminating against older workers, they wouldn't have to spend so much time and money on importing foreign workers. Just a thought. Research refutes assumptions that older workers are, as we talked about earlier, less productive, technophobic, or inflexible, more likely to experience health-related absences, less likely to remain on the job than boomers and millennials, and are more expensive. So I think we've made the case, and I'm sure you knew this already, but there is ageism and there is age discrimination. And I think the question is, well, what do we do about it? But here's a few more other statistics, since I have them right in front of me. Employees over 50 are known to be the most engaged in the workplace, not to mention the most experienced. So they make better team members than do millennials and Gen Xers. But yet, despite this, we seem to have what some people call a young blood hiring policy, that companies are not doing this explicitly because they don't want to be caught, but there's informal agreement that they should be hiring younger people. And unfortunately, this has been caused a systematic phasing out of older workers. And that is one of the real, I think, one of the major problems, but also one of the major impact of this particular approach. Now, you might ask, well, do other cultures do this? The answer is no. In other cultures, European, Asian, there is a much higher regard for mature workers. In fact, they're often, there's often deference. They consider them to have more knowledge, more insight, more wisdom, more experience. Plus, there's just a general regard for age in those particular cultures. We would have to take, hours to examine the sociological implications of ageism in our culture. While it's not new, I think it's more pernicious now than it ever has been. So let's get on to the research. We're doing research at Discovery Northwest on ageism. There's research being done around the country. You mentioned AARP, Charlie. They do some research. You think AARP would be provide stronger advocacy against ageism, but they don't seem to. And frankly, they were created to support retirees. And so I understand why that might not be their primary mission. I mean, they still send out AARP packages at age 49. When somebody turns 50, they expect them to be part of AARP. I don't know anybody who's 50 who has retired. Do you? My father worked until he was 76, and I expect to do the same. Another, I think, important finding from my research was that about 20% of workers, and this is higher in high-tech companies, said they don't want a boss who is 70 years or older. They simply don't want to work for somebody who is 70 years or older. Although I'm not sure how they would know someone's age, but I guess some people it's pretty obvious. That's sad. To me, that's sad as well. And most of this points to a cultural bias about age. And frankly, that's why age became a protected class in EEOC. And I don't think we have improved since the mid 60s. So, and no, I know we haven't. The research says it's worse. It's more pernicious, and that's sad. So what do we do to overcome this? Because we know it exists. How do we fight it? Well, number one, we fight it. Now, I'm not suggesting that you file lawsuits and go to the EEOC. First of all, it's very difficult to prove age discrimination. Remember, the conditions are that there has to be a pattern and it has to be substantive. So companies do a pretty good job of protecting themselves from liability in this area. One of the reasons they interview so many people for a particular position is to get a pool of mature workers or minority workers so they can show that data like, yeah, we had several people that we were interviewing, but unfortunately none of them were sufficient to meet our needs as an employer. So that's very good. I'm glad to hear that, Charlie. Yeah, I've had actually I've never had a younger manager. Now that yes, I have. Okay, but everyone that I've worked with was respectful and decent and dignified. So yeah, that's true, but it depends where you are. I've been in an education environment, so they tend to be far less concerned about age, and there's far less age discrimination in education. You know where there is also a lot less age discrimination? Sports, particularly in administration and management. Look at our coach here in Seattle. Pete Carroll is what, he just turned 69. So if you're successful as a coach in most professional sports, they don't even give your age any consideration. They just look at your merit. So I think there's a lot we can learn. I think the same is largely true in healthcare. I have a doctor friend who's 60, and I asked her yesterday, I said, well, do you feel there's a lot of age discrimination in the workplace, in your workplace? And she said, no. And she said, particularly true in specializations where if you were, a gifted oncologist, they weren't, and a successful oncologist, they wouldn't care whether you were 59 or 69. So there are some industries where it's far less pervasive and pernicious. So getting back to the research, if you do any kind of literature review, you are going to come away with the conclusion that we are an age biased culture and we discriminate against older workers. It's just that simple. There's no other way to interpret the data. So now we ask, well, what can we do about it? Okay. I have no idea, frankly. No, I do, actually. I think we can become our own personal advocates. When we feel we have been the victim of age discrimination, we should speak up. I'm not saying report everything to the EEOC, but talk to the company. I've done that. And of course, they come back and say, no, it had nothing to do with your age. Bullshit. I'm sorry to use that French. I know everybody doesn't understand French. So I see your dog there, Charlie. He wants to get in on the conversation. So what kind of advocacy can we expect? What kind of advocacy can we implement? First of all, we can make our elected representatives aware Denny Heck is 68. He's the new lieutenant governor. He's likely to become the interim governor if Inslee accepts a administrative position. He's a guy who I think probably cares about this issue, although he isn't aware of the lack of resources that we have in the state of Washington. We have a council on aging for the state of Washington, but guess what it focuses on? It focuses on long-term care and in-home care. It doesn't focus on helping you find a job because they assume, well, anybody over 60, they're going to be retiring. They're not going to need a job. I think that is a notion from, the 1960s itself. The data does not indicate that or support that assumption. Older workers, mature workers, I'm sorry. Wow. Yeah, he's getting up there. Okay. Well, I'm sure you defer to his age and recognize that he has a great deal of insight and wisdom to share with you. Although, that's interesting that you brought that up because we seem to be much more concerned about the mature years of our pets than we are about our family members and our neighbors. And, as much as I love pets, I find that, difficult to understand. So this is cultural. I think we have to fight it on every conceivable front. I think we fight it through advocacy programs beginning in elementary school. It's sort of like, age discrimination is an ism. It's like genderism, racism. And unless you treat it as a pernicious form of discrimination and stop tolerating it and accepting it. In fact, many researchers and advocates call it the hidden form of discrimination because so few people are aware of it. And it just doesn't seem to be a top of mind issue for most companies. And they have been very successful in hiding their age discrimination. And one reason is we don't stand up. We don't advocate in our behalf. And we can do that and should do that. So we need to make our elected officials aware of this. We need to, yeah, I bet. Well, yeah. And so am I. So I am a victim of age discrimination. And I was downsized from a administrative job. One of the sad facts about being downsized at this age is that it's very unlikely you're going to ever recapture the same level of income that you did before you were downsized. And that's something additionally we have to fight. But who will advocate for you? I will. Discovery Northwest will. So we are going to become advocates for mature workers and against age discrimination and ageism. But we're going to need some help. There you go. Congratulations. You got another 30 years to go, so you're probably going to need to work. And even if we are prepared for retirement, most of us don't want to retire. What are you going to do? You're going to travel? Well, not now. You're going to retire to your couch and watch Netflix all day? Well, they don't have any new programming, so you're going to watch a lot of repeat stuff. Same thing with Hulu or Prime. So we work because, at least according to Maslow and Alderfer and Herzberg, a lot of the motivational theorists, they say work is endemic to our human nature, and work enables us to feel meaningful and productive, and it actually contributes to longevity and a healthier life, not just because we're earning an income, because we're doing something meaningful and contributing. So advocacy begins with you individually and then finding, yes, absolutely, that's true. So there are a lot of free resources available to help you understand whether or not you've been discriminated against and how to manage that discrimination, how to address it. And I think that's, advisable if you really feel you have been discriminated against and you can prove it. But remember, the threshold is much higher. The burden of proof is much higher for ageism than it is racism or genderism or sexual harassment.
but age harassment is an actual condition that we need to be aware of. And I think we haven't really focused enough on age harassment as we have on age discrimination. But harassment often leads to discrimination, and any kind of harassment creates a hostile work environment. And I think most companies are very much, opposed to having that occur. Um, so what can you do? Um, is the question. And first of all, become aware. Do some research. Know how pervasive and how prevalent it is, and what constitutes discrimination, what constitutes harassment, what the legal burden of proof is, what the likelihood of proving your case is, and then do something, becoming proactive about it, or even reactive. If you feel you've legitimately been discriminated against, you need to go to the EEOC and file a complaint. They take those seriously, and they're going to follow up on it, and they're going to determine whether your complaint has merit. You should be advocating to your elected representatives at the state and federal level that there are more resources provided to mature workers, particularly in small business development and entrepreneurship, but also in career transitioning and career repurposing. There just are very few resources targeted to older workers, mature workers. I got to eliminate that from my vocabulary. Why is that? Because of those assumptions I talked about previously, and also because we don't have any real advocacy groups. You mentioned the AARP, and when I started all of this stuff, I thought, well, the AARP must be doing, no, they're not. They're about retirement. The American Association of Retired People. It's that simple. They think you're retired, and they think if you want to go back to work, you're going to do some part-time job just to keep yourself occupied. So they have fundamental misconceptions about the nature of age discrimination and how prevalent it is in our culture. But then again, that's not their purpose. So we need to see more nonprofit groups formed that are going to be advocating for older workers, for mature workers. And that's a mantle that I think Discovery Northwest is picking up, and we want to support. And those are the major ways that I see, because I think it's a political movement, no question about it. There has to be a political movement, but it has to start at the grassroots level. And the only way you succeed politically is persistence, determination, dedication, and willfulness. Most people write a letter, they give up. I mean, during this pandemic, during the unemployment issue the state was having, I must have written 20 letters. I'm talking about, word process letters that I mailed in the regular mail. Did they make a difference? I think they did. And at least it alerted them to the fact that there are a lot of people. And, when you get a letter, it actually represents about 100 emails. So write a letter. Ask the new lieutenant governor, what are you going to do to help mature workers? Why isn't the state targeting resources to older mature workers who have been downsized from COVID? Those sorts of things. In fact, we can help you with that. I have form letters that you can use, sign your name to it, send it off in your own, with your own stamp, of course, put it in your mailbox. But those things make a difference. One letter is 100 emails. So there's no question about that. And contact us, contact me, and we can have a discussion about, how you can become more of an advocate, and also what you can do to elevate your prospects in the workplace. Because I think there are specific things that you can do. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't emphasize the importance of continual learning, lifelong learning. I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm back in school. I have a doctorate and 3 master's degrees. I'm working on my 4th master's degree. Why? Because I can, because I want to. Not that I want to have another degree, although in education, your letters matter. But it tells employers, if that's where I was headed before I started my own business, that I am interested in continual development and learning and being an asset to the organization, and that I don't ever, think that I know enough, because you don't. Technology does change. So it's important to know the current applications and, how the technology is changing. And although it hasn't really changed that much, frankly, uh, most companies, if you talk about a skill set and information management, or information technology skill sets, it's still primarily about word processing, database administration, and social media and communication. More sophisticated jobs, that are involved in research would require the knowledge of some specific software, but you can learn all of that. If you have general IT proficiency, then you can learn new software, because let's face it, a new software program like comes out every 6 months. So by the time you learn it, they implement a new one. And that's unfortunate, but that happens. So I think if you are involved in continual learning, that says to the employer that you are trying to stay informed and you are developing yourself. You're not sitting around letting your hair turn gray like me. Oh, I'm not sitting around, but it's still turning gray. Should you color your hair? That's a good question. I say no, don't do it. But it's everybody, and I'm being flippant about that. So advocacy, very important. So we're about ready, 5 minutes away from conclusion. Do you have any questions for me? I thought we had 12 people signed up for this. Okay. See, they gave up. They said it's impossible. Or they found a job. That's it. Any questions, Charlie? And also feel free to contact me offline. I think Area posted my email address. And you can find us in the Kent Chamber of Commerce directory, Discovery Northwest, and I'll be happy to talk to you free consultation about how we might help you, and at least point you to some other resources. But part of what I would say is become your own personal advocate. Start writing letters, do some research, develop your skill set. One of the things that we do at Discovery Northwest is offer certificate programs. I don't think you need to go back to school to earn a degree. In fact, more and more companies are giving as much or greater value to people who are earning certificates. We're talking about 4 or 5 classes. Discovery Northwest, we offer short-term, low-cost certificates, and that I think is where the market is headed, where hiring is headed. People that are earning certificates that are focused and specialized and topical. For example, we have one on analytics that is a 12-week certificate program, and when you finish it, you are conversant in how to analyze data and how to communicate your knowledge of that data and how to use it in persuading decision makers, and et cetera, et cetera. That's just one of a few that we offer. But there are many of them around, whether it's a university or a private vocational school like us. Take advantage of them, especially the lower cost ones, and they make a difference. So I think I have like 5 certificates. So let's say you are a human resources professional and you were laid off. So maybe you're interested in recruiting, or we don't even call it that anymore. It's talent management. Go to a University of Washington or a community college, we don't yet offer that, and take a short-term micro-credentialing certificate program specifically on that topic, talent management. Then you go to an employer and say, well, I just completed this certificate and I've learned all the most important contemporary information and strategies about how to, recruit and how to develop a talent management strategy and implement it. They're going to listen to you. Whereas if you go in and say, well, I earned my master's degree in human resources in 1995. Okay. But guess what? It hasn't really changed that much. But to them, it's saying, oh, it's old. The world is has passed you by. You were using dot matrix printers in 1995, and we didn't even have cell phones. So you see what I mean? Be contemporary. That's one of the assumptions, that older workers, mature workers, are not relevant. So make yourself relevant. All right. I don't know. What time do you have, Aria?
54.
Oh, we got 6 minutes. So let's play a game. No, I'm kidding. Any questions that any of you have that aren't here? I guess you wouldn't be able to share them. Charlie, maybe you could tell me a little bit about your dilemma or your situation, or what.
Oh, I've just seen it at all angles, because I've been an employee and I've been an owner. We just hired 2 people in our salon, and we don't use ageism because one was 34 and one was 49. So
I'll give you credit.
But I've experienced as an employee working for big name companies that advertise, oh yeah, we have full benefits and we give people medical, and they don't, because they do reverse ageism.
Right.
They hire lots of married women because they make the assumption their husbands won't need and then they hire retirees, Medicare age or older.
I think they're on Medicare.
Because again, they're on Medicare. So I was the guy between 40 and 60 still trying to raise my family and needed health care, but they wouldn't show me the promised package when my probation was up.
Wow.
Because
no, that's terrible.
They don't want to pay the health care, even though that's...
Did you sue? Did you file a lawsuit? Did you complain?
No, it wasn't worth it. I was making $12 an hour retail. So I'm going to waste.
But you know what? If that ever happened to you again, I would encourage you to contact the EEOC, because that is clearly a form of ageism and a common practice with some companies. So I'm sorry that happened to you, and that's you know, you're not alone. Thousands of people have experienced that.
So I'm a healthcare broker now. I help people get healthcare.
Great. Yeah. So you became an entrepreneur.
Yeah, because I got tired of working for companies that break their promise.
Yes.
To take care and just keep their promises. I mean, I'm not expecting to be enriched or amazed, but when you say on a job search or a job ad that you're going to provide all these benefits if the employee gives you their heart and soul, and then you lie to them.
Yeah.
How do they get away with that? It's out in the public domain.
You know what? How do they get away with it is the good question. The reason they get away with it is because we let them. Not you specifically,
right?
But culturally, we seem to value profit over people, and that is repeated in workplaces around the country. So I regret that has happened to you, but it seems like you have made a good decision and rebounded from it and learned from that experience. So did you go back and get any additional education or training after that?
I had to self-support and invest. I changed careers. I went into insurance. So I'm an insurance
so you had to get
small
a license.
Business consultant, right?
Okay.
So my thing is just saving people one person, one business at a time.
Yeah.
And using the connections that the chamber has. The whole COVID experience has taught us we can't rely on many of the established institutions like government and whatever. Yeah. So we have to reach out to each other and try to share best practices, support, find solutions, because we're not getting it from the major parts of society anymore. They're just dropping the ball.
Well, I agree completely, and I don't know if they're going to pick it up after COVID. So I do, applaud you for taking that initiative, and it sounds like you have survived that experience, and people can learn from your success. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Thanks for your presentation.
Well, thank you. And I guess we're about out of time. So I thank you for attending, and hopefully something that I presented was meaningful and relevant and useful.
Thanks, Araya, for hosting.
Yes,
thanks, Araya, and happy holidays to both of you.
Happy holidays, and thank you, Dr. Kelly, for presenting for us today. You guys have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye.